It was about 2 weeks ago, and I was in central Illinois, and I was headed to a forum for candidates, Senate candidates. And it was put on by the farmers of downstate Illinois. I've got a lot of friends there. And we went off to a farm, and before we got there, I had an extra 45 minutes, and I hadn't had lunch. And so we were driving around Bloomington, Normal, Illinois, in McLean County, and I said, let's stop and get a sandwich somewhere. And my driver said, well, there's a Burger King. I said, no thanks. There's a Steak and Shake, which happens to be a franchise we're pretty proud of in the Midwest and in Illinois. I consciously decided not to stop at Burger King. Why? Because within the last several weeks, Burger King has announced that they are consciously deciding to leave the United States. This iconic hamburger chain, second largest in the world, has bought a donut chain in Canada, and now they want to move their headquarters up to Canada out of Miami, Florida. Why would they move their corporate headquarters out of the United States of America, where they have most of their restaurants? To cut their taxes. It's called inversion. If you can pick up and on paper move your corporation to Switzerland, Ireland, the island of Jersey, Canada, you name it, there are ways that accountants and lawyers have figured out how to reduce your tax burden. But of course, as companies decide to do that, they are also making conscious decisions to stop paying U.S. taxes or avoid paying U.S. taxes, at least some part of them. Now, we've seen a lot of companies have announced this. AbbVie, which is a pharmaceutical company in the suburbs, northern suburbs of Chicago, used to be Abbott Labs. AbbVie has decided they want to move overseas. And I took a look at it and thought for a moment, interesting. A pharmaceutical company wants to move overseas. How important was the United States to the success of a pharmaceutical company like AbbVie? To the fact that they developed drugs and products that were profitable. How important was this country to that company? I would say critically important. Companies don't usually come up with all the ideas for new drugs. They rely on the National Institutes of Health, the premier biomedical research agency in the world. Annual budget in the range of $31 billion, and they do research which they then turn over free of charge to pharmaceutical companies to develop drugs to make money. The National Institutes of Health is supported by American taxpayers. And then if a pharmaceutical company develops this new drug that they think has the potential to be a blockbuster and sell a lot, there's another step. You have to go to the Food and Drug Administration, the United States Food and Drug Administration, and they test it. And if at the end of testing, they come up with a conclusion that it's not only safe but effective for what it's being used for, they give a seal of approval. It is the gold standard of safety of pharmaceuticals. Food and Drug Administration supported by the United States government and American taxpayers. And then it isn't over. At least one last stop. You go to the patent office to make sure that you protect your intellectual property, this pharmaceutical formula. U.S. Patent Office, supported by the government and U.S. taxpayers. So here is a pharmaceutical company using research, using testing, and using protections of patents from our government, who says, incidentally, we're leaving. We don't want to pay taxes to this government. We want to reduce our tax burden to this government. There's something wrong with this picture. 49 or 50 nations have done it, and more are threatening. Take a Burger King. Well, the sale of hamburgers doesn't involve a great deal of research, but the product that you're cooking at your store has been inspected for safety by the U.S. federal government. And the place where your store is located probably is on a highway or street supported by our government. But then there's one other element. The people who work in fast food in America aren't usually paid a lot of money. Their income is supplemented by government programs, like food stamps. It turns out to the tune of about $7 billion a year. That's what taxpayers in America pay to subsidize the income of workers in fast food restaurants. So here is a place like Burger King, that is using the largesse, protection, rule of law in the United States to do their business, counting on our government to step in and supplement the income of the person frying the hamburgers and serving it, and saying, incidentally, we're leaving. We don't have any obligation to this country to pay taxes. We're going to Canada on paper. There's something wrong with this picture. To me, if you were going to desert this country as a corporation, consumers first ought to be aware of it. That's why I drove past Burger King. I don't care to do business with a company that doesn't think it owes its fair share of taxes. Because if they don't pay their fair share of taxes, other good American companies will be forced to pay more, and other individuals will. So it's right for us to speak up now about this process of inversion and bringing it to an end. It isn't just a matter of escaping the taxes. There are accounting techniques, which I see I have several colleagues on the floor here preparing to speak. I'm going to put my statement in the record. There are accounting techniques which these inverted corporations can use to even reduce their corporate taxation more. Some the U.S. corporate income tax is too high. The nominal rate is 35%. The effective rate is closer to 25%, and the major corporations pay in the range of 10 to 15%. When you look at the countries they're going to, Ireland, I believe their corporate income tax rate is 12.5%. Cayman Islands, 0. So we can't play to the lowest denominator, play to the bottom line, the bottom corporate income tax. It's a lose-lose situation. What we have to do is to make sure that inversion comes at a price. I've joined with Senator Schumer. We put in a bill later this week to talk about this whole question of inversion as it relates to the tax code. It's a technical bill that Senator Schumer has largely written as a member of the Senate Finance Committee and asked me to join him on because of my interest in the subject. It limits the practice of earnings stripping, a tax lawyer's trick where you load all the debt onto the U.S. subsidiary, then write off the debt and the interest payments as a tax deduction. The bill, which I'll introduce with Senator Schumer, is designed to prevent corporations from taking excessive interest deductions and sticking U.S. taxpayers with the tab. There are other parts of that bill. I'll close by saying this. I believe that the tax code should be written in a positive fashion. It is not positive in our tax code to set the stage for corporations to move their jobs and headquarters overseas. In fact, we allow under our tax code for these corporations to deduct their moving expenses if they're going overseas. What are we thinking? Why would we create an incentive, a deduction, for taking jobs out of America? I think there's a better approach. When the time comes for tax reform, and I hope it's soon, I'm going to propose that we have something called the Patriot Corporations Credit. Here's what it says, pretty simple. If your headquarters for your corporation's in the United States, if you kept your jobs here in the United States, if at least 90% of your employees are paid at least $15 an hour, if you've got good health insurance, according to the standards of the Affordable Care Act, if you will contribute at least 5% of your employees' earnings toward their retirement, and if you will give a veteran's preference, we will give you a tax credit. We want to reward, we should reward, and incentivize companies that build their future in America, companies that believe in America, companies that pay a decent wage and benefits to the people who work for them. That's what should be in the tax code. Let's start incentivizing job building and job expansion here in the United States. Let's stop these deductions for moving jobs overseas, and let's put an end to this corporate inversion. These folks have got to realize we're not going to stand still for them gaming the tax code to avoid their responsibility to the country, which by and large created the success of most of their corporations. Mr. President.